I'm going to call this meeting of the Newington Board of Education, our special meeting, to order at 6:01 p.m. and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We are going to start our agenda with item C, public participation on any matter related to board responsibilities. I want to remind the public we did on purpose put another public participation before our executive session, so if you have any comments after the public portion of the evening, you'll have a chance to be heard at that time as well. And our phone line is open at 860-665-8736. Seeing no phone calls and no one from the public coming up to speak, we will move on to item D, which is a discussion of the financial impact regarding the... Oh, Ms. Clay, would you like to come up? Come on up. What's that? Okay.
And whistles.
Please just state your name and the address.
So Maureen Platt, 104 Harold Drive, and first I want to apologize because I lost my very best friend, lost her 32-year-old son today unexpectedly. So this is the very last place in the world that I want to be tonight. So it should tell you how important I feel it is that I'm here. The recent diesel fuel spill has resulted in a diverse reaction from the public as demonstrated on social media. Some protagonists are using this calamity for their own self-serving initiatives in order to effectively address all the concerns. It would be best to take a deep breath and have this fully investigated before speculation gets the best of us. The worst thing that the town and its politicians is to make rash judgments based upon conjecture. The willingness of the town to release an audio tape of what turns out to be a private conversation between two officials has been premature at best. After all, this would be part of an ongoing investigation, and its release is questionable and should have been vigorously challenged. At the very least, there should have been redactions on the part of the town where names were mentioned and where topics were not related to the spill were uttered. One has to question the motivation. I've heard it said or tried to be explained last night that it was FOI'd, but the fact of the matter is it got to the point where it was ratcheted up so that it could be FOI'd. For the mayor and his council to play this recording is irresponsible. I don't blame all the council members. I know that there were at least the Democrats that I spoke to last night didn't even have a choice in having the meeting last night. It was scheduled by the mayor, and the meeting took place. And as one council member, Mr. Race, said, didn't actually fit into his schedule, but that didn't seem to matter. According to the town attorney and town manager, the town has hired an investigative firm to determine what went wrong. To play the tape at this point in time is premature, prejudicial, without context, and not probative to cause. To take any action at this point would most certainly be premature. What's more, when you investigate your approach, you should be open-minded as to a cause and a remedy. In our world in Newington, you blame the board and rally your Facebook cronies to make your case. What's happening in Newington is just a site on Facebook. It is what I'm asked daily from my friends in adjacent towns if I'm finding it not fun to answer questions. As to finding fault, it's not just the board, it is across the board. The pumps were installed by the town as well as the fuel master system, which was purchased subsequently by the town. The system provides forensic accounting of fuel consumption, and it is used for billing between the town, the fire, the Board of Education, and the police department. This is operated by the town highway department. The board wanted access to the system in 2014. but issues with shared networking of the two entities prohibited this from happening. The town highway controls the operation of the fuel master system and bills the board for gas usage. They must have the ability to determine inventory usage, gas mileage, and consumption. Instead of looking for heads to roll, which I've heard said, and I've also heard people quote inaccurate things that were supposedly said, and I've seen a member of your Board of Education post up on Facebook in a big red bold, release the tape, which I honestly think is very unprofessional for a board member to do. Our town fathers should put their heads together and seeking out the best remedy and move forward. It is time for Newington to become the Newington we once knew.
Thank you, Mrs. Klett. We're very sorry for your loss earlier today. I did notice a phone call coming in the middle of that, so if someone wants to call back in, 860-665-8736. And if there's any other comments from the public that are here this evening, please come forward. Good evening, Mrs. Havens.
Good evening.
I apologize. Here's our call.
Go ahead.
Do you know how to... Hello, Mrs. Oliveira. You're on with the board.
Oh, do you have caller ID?
Evidently we do now. I've never seen the name pop up before.
All right. I'm having a tough time hearing everybody. I don't know if it would help if you can move the mics closer or you move closer to the mics.
Okay. We will do our best. Do you have any other comments?
No, I'm just watching. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
It's a good reminder, as NCTV likes to remind us, make sure your mics are close, and I was not doing a good job of that. So, Mrs. Havens, if you could give your name and address.
Dana Havens, 113 Stoddard Avenue. I wasn't going to speak, but I kind of want to counter Mrs. Collette a bit and agree with her. It's a shame that a lot of this has been said on Facebook, and it's a shame that there's been errors made on Facebook. But, there was also some interactions on both sides of the board, and members who knew that things that were being said weren't true didn't step up and correct it and let it go on. I'm not saying that the board members shouldn't engage on Facebook. I'd really miss that, but I think that they need to be fair and honest when they do engage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Havens. Any further comments from the public? Another phone call. Good evening, Mrs. Sarubi.
Hello, it's Rose Lyons, 46 Elton Drive. I just want to call in and say I was at the meeting last night of the Town Council. I walked out when the tape was being played. I did not read the transcript until later last night. My comment at midnight to myself was much ado about nothing. I think that Mrs. Klett said it all and what she had to say, and I too wish that we could get back to the Newington that we used to be and not going after the jugular vein without thinking first. I think that the main concern here is that the diesel spill get taken care of, not that we go looking to chop off heads. Last night the transcript was received by everyone. It was passed out, but not one single copy of the town manager's remarks regarding the update to the oil spill were passed out to the residents. That to me was far more important to us residents, taxpayers, than what was overheard on a voicemail message that was nobody else's business than the two people that were involved in the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rose. Is there any further public comment at this time? Just give the phones another second. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is discussion of the financial impact regarding the diesel release. I want to start by framing the conversation that this is specific to financial impact to the Board of Education. I believe all board members did receive an email today from the town manager updating us on the totals of invoices that have come in from the different vendors that are doing the cleanup at the site right now. The most current number as of today is $875,785.34. This is, of course, about $200,000 higher than the last figures we had. There's a batch of invoices going up to, for one vendor up to the end of January and another vendor up to January 21st. So right now the financial impact is about $875,000 as of this date. There are, of course, other invoices from those dates until the present that have yet to be billed out to the town, and I think the best estimate right now is about $200,000. Additionally, we expect to be billed at some point. It just hasn't come out through the invoices yet. This evening, all board members now have, from Mr. Jacomowitz, a document showing the state of our finances as a Board of Education. And this, and I want to make this clear, this is not our operating budget. So we have a $70 million plus operating budget from the town council. There are also funds that the Board of Ed has that are in town, one of them's town control. They're on the town side of the books, we'll say. So there is the CIP fund, the Capital Improvement Fund, for which there are monies that go into every year to do capital projects around town. There is a public school capital improvement fund, which is a board fund for which receipts that we receive go into that fund, and we also do maintenance projects through that, other capital improvements around the district. We'll also talk a little bit about our health benefit fund, which is a refund every year for those of you who don't know. When claims come back throughout the year, if the claims show less of a total than what we were told to put into that health benefits account at the beginning of the year, then there's a refund credit that comes back. That money is often spent on things like special education overages, maintenance repairs, technology from time to time. And so there is a credit from this in this current school year that we currently have money from, and there is an expected credit for next year potentially, although that is of course only just over halfway through the year, so we don't know where that will wind up. So we'll talk about all of those things. I also want to note that there's been many discussions between town councilors and Board of Ed members trying to figure out what to do here. And no final decisions have been made, but I will say one thing has been determined, that the Board of Ed will be responsible for this initial set of invoices and potentially any other invoices that come in pending insurance coverage. So right now there's $875,000 worth of invoices that the Board of Ed has agreed to take on and that we will be paying. And this is all done in collaboration with the town. We know that there are funds that we have in these public school CIP and the CIP that's on the town side that can potentially cover much of the expense of the cleanup. And we're certainly willing to do that since we have more flexibility than the town does at this time. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Mr. Jacomowitz to explain the various items that I just kind of briefly summarized, and then we'll have an opportunity for the board to ask questions, give comments, and determine a path forward for what the best way is to pay this amount of money right now.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Schuman. In giving everybody a big picture sense of the remediation project itself, we are billed right now at $875,000 with about another $200,000 of work that has not been billed yet but been completed. So around $1.1 million is what has been spent to date on the project. Roughly, we're not quite to the 50% mark in total work that needs to be done comprehensively across all parts of the project. So maintaining a conservative stance at this point, we should expect that the total of the project will be in the neighborhood of $3 million with a potential of $1 million insurance recovery. So there's a net $2 million of risk for the board and the town, or however it's actually allocated when the time comes. Okay. In looking at the ongoing operations, we anticipate we're we'll be complete with the majority of the work for substantial completion by the end of March. At that point, we will be in the process of starting to make decisions about what restoration work will actually occur at the site, how that will be designed and implemented, and obviously whatever cost implications are associated with with that work. Okay. On the document you have in front of you, I'd like to start in the lower left-hand corner of this, which is titled Funding Decisions. Okay, because this really is the landscape of what all the board members need to consider and be thoughtful about in arriving at the funding decision you're going to be willing to approve. Okay. As I mentioned a moment ago, there is the $2 million net exposure at this time for the environmental projects for the remediation work. And I have $150,000 as basically a placeholder at this time for those customized restoration costs that we would need at the site. We would obviously need to have a substantial electrical infrastructure developed in order to allow all the diesel buses to be plugged in winter months so they would start in the morning, along with, potentially if a tank is brought back to that site, and other decisions we don't know about at the moment, lighting for the area, any other utility services that need to be considered. Okay. In addition, if we go to the bottom of the page, there are the basic needs of the Board of Ed, which are the traditional expenses of high dollars that the board has expended in the past, as well as those certain projects that are identified as really essential for the short term. I'm speaking within the next 18 months of needing to get these done. Okay. You have the ongoing $188,000 for the Chromebook allowance that as of right now is within the 18-19 request for the town CIP account, and there is a zero allowance in the board operating budget. In addition, the traditional allocation of maintaining the longevity schedule for the buses of $644,000 is not in the operating budget at this time. It is in the proposal for next year's Board of Ed town capital improvement plan. Okay. We have no needs for roof repairs at both Newington High School and John Patterson. There are, to kind of frame the discussion in a little broader scope, there's about 200,000 square feet in total of roof space at both schools that need to be removed and replaced. Both of the existing roof systems are essentially mid-1980s vintage, so they're 30 years or older at both locations. Using a 200,000 square foot framework at about $25 a square foot is about $500,000 if we wanted to do everything. We clearly are not looking for that. We're really trying to go in a process of addressing those highest need areas immediately or as soon as possible, and then as other areas haven't weathered as badly, those will be pushed down the road for restoration. We do have some chronic problems in the area over the art department in Newington High School. That would really be the first project that would need to be addressed. That's there. Okay. In addition, the underground storage tanks that we have for heating oil at 5 of the 7 schools and 4 of the 7 schools, along with the field house, are on a timetable where they need to be removed either 2019, 2020, or 2021. And we have a basic outline schedule for doing 2 each of the next 2 years and 1 in the 3rd year. That would start for the coming year with Martin Kellogg and John Patterson, then Newington High School and Elizabeth Green, and then the following year, finishing up, would be the field house. Okay, that is a mandatory thing. At 30-year life, they have to come out of the ground. So that is an essential task we have to plan for. So, in addition, we have other requests that are floating where we have to address needs of the larger town hall building committee project. We have been asked to consider participating in cost sharing on both the temporary relocation of the Human Resource Department, which we have a tentative lease agreement in an office building on Cedar Street, as well as the relocation of the Transition Academy. This would be a portable structure that would be constructed in the parking lot down by the town engineering department on the lower level. Okay. This is necessary because the first phase of the project would be the demolition of the east wing of the building, which houses both of those areas, and that would be the part of the job that needs to get started. So these are basically the precursor expenses to put the town hall project in position to be able to move forward on the time schedule they want to move on. And these would be things that, if the schedule holds, would need to be done no later than, say, by August 1st for completion date. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions on this part of it first before I move on?
Mr. Sylvia.
Thank you very much. So Lou, I just added up the numbers on the upper left-hand corner. I came to $546,325.
Okay. Then there'd be an error in the Excel calculation.
Why don't we start with what Lou just described in the bottom left-hand corner? If you have any questions about that, I'm sure he's moving to that next section afterwards.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. And does anyone else have any questions for Lou about the future funding decisions? And Mrs. Guyan?
I just have a question about is it 200,000 square feet per roof at each of the schools, or total?
In total.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions before I move on? Seeing none.
Okay, continuing on, we will move to the board CIP account in the upper left-hand corner is the next component to talk about. And if there is, we say a $40,000 discrepancy?
There's not an error. I just looked at it.
It's not, it's okay?
It's fine.
Okay. Okay. Of the balance that we have in the account as of January 31st was just under $1,100,000 of available resources. And the way the board CIP project works is it's the conduit for most of the rental revenues that are generated by the Board of Ed each year, as well as tuition expenses. So when we have groups that rent our facilities for special events, cultural activities, dance recitals, all of the revenue that's associated with that transaction ultimately becomes revenue for the board CIP account. You know, whatever revenues are generated are then reappropriated and available the next fiscal year. Okay? In addition, this has traditionally been more of a lower value account that deals with ongoing recurring expenses each year. We need new furniture for the buildings. We need new carpeting, new paint jobs, some new security devices, some new low-value technology items. Most of the activity is geared around that sort of an activity flow. We do also have the ability to carry one or two larger projects at times because of the cap being raised to $1,200,000 a few years ago. And we, last year we did a portion of the roof over at John Patterson through this account. And this runs with a traditional bidding arrangement and full project management arrangement that's here. Of the projects that we have in there, there's probably 15 or 18 small line items of different things. And for the sake of focusing on the big picture, I have really what are the important things, the high-value dollar items that are here. Right now we know that the chiller system in Martin Kellogg is in very precarious state. If we don't act soon, we would, if we had an outage in the spring, in the warm days of May and June, it would be a rather unpleasant environment in the entire classroom wing. So we have that identified really as our immediate short-term priority of what we need to do. Okay. Then, depending on the interaction, because we have so many moving parts between decisions that will happen both under Board of Ed control as well as town control, I've listed setting aside $300,000 for dealing with roof work through the Board of Ed account here. In addition, we have the two underground storage tanks proposals or removals that are before Martin Kellogg and John Patterson for this summer, along with a general technology allowance for replacing switches, servers, wireless infrastructure, things that are not in the kids' hands that are here, which total $596,325. which leaves an available balance that could be reallocated for other purposes if it was decided for earmarking this money for helping to pay for the remediation work. This could certainly be made available without compromising major needs of the district in the next 6 months or so. Okay. Any questions on this section before I move forward?
So, Lou, I first want to ask for clarification. Yes. So right now it's almost at $1.1 million. Has that been an intentional buildup over the last couple of years?
Yes, and also some deferrals of various projects. I know when we were looking at John Wallace for the wing restoration, we had set aside at least $100,000 for the finishing touches inside that wing after it's done. Since the project hasn't started, that money has basically been sitting in a non-actionable state at the moment. And there are smaller allowances across a number of different items in this area, $10,000 to $20,000, $30,000 to do these different things. So it's, becomes a lot of money because we have so many different elements within the project. So basically I've turned all of the carpeting, the security devices, the furniture, everything back to zero to come up with this profile in the account.
Okay. Mrs. Guyan?
When you were talking about the technology needs, you gave a number of $500-something thousand, I think?
For
No, you just
technology,
said-
I must have misspoken, 71,000.
Yeah, that's the number that I saw. I don't know if I didn't hear it correctly or if you said something different. I just want to make
I
sure
thought
we're
I
on the
said
same
71,
page.
but
Okay, that's okay. We're on the same page then. That's fine.
Mr. Sylvia?
I just want to share that my math skills are lacking. I used my calculator and so it was my error.
Fair enough. Mrs. Strauss?
I just want to understand, so if we didn't fund the Martin Kellogg chillers, it would just be a school without air conditioning?
you would be at risk for that. If it goes down, we would not have the ability to react quick enough because it would be, the entire chiller plant would need to be replaced. It's not a repair we can just go down to.
I just asked because I
somebody else.
know there's been a lot of like elementary schools that just recently got air conditioning and things
It's
like that.
different type of
so-
system. Those were basically a distributed system where each classroom has its own unit. This is a centralized chiller that's on the roof that services the whole wing of the building.
Okay, thank you.
And this may get somewhat confusing at some point. Some may remember that this chiller's been talked about
For a
in
while.
previous years. There was an allocation for district-wide HVAC improvements for which that was one of the items that was on the agenda for. And Lou will, I don't want to put the cart before the horse,
Right.
but Lou will talk about after. But that is part of the town council's freeze right now on capital improvements so that they can address the state budget issues that are ongoing. So when we talk about that as a need in the public school CIP, in a normal year when the state budget wasn't collapsing, that would be something that would be taken care of by the town CIP account. But the need to be able to get it done necessitates the fact that it becomes one of our commitments from the public school CIP account, because if it needs to get done, it has to get done immediately. Mrs. Strauss?
Is it cheaper, or would it be more prudent to, keep it up to date, or if it broke, is it gonna be $300,000 to fix? So like if you keep your car, oil changes, and it's preventative, you're better off than if you just let your engine seize.
Well,
Good
Just-
analogy?
the way this is set up, since it's one system that services about 45, 50 classrooms in the building, and it's called a two-stage system where phase one fails, phase two can pick it up, but phase two doesn't have enough capacity to run the whole building. Phase one is unstable right now, and phase two is even more unstable. And we're very concerned that when one goes, the other one would only be a few days behind it for failure, that it's not really capable of managing the load of the whole building. And since you have a very tight building envelope there, it gets hot in that wing. And it's, really needs to be climate controlled to provide an appropriate educational setting for the kids.
So obviously that's one of the reasons why it's on the commitment list, and when we've had some conversations with the town council, either jointly or I met with some of them previously as well to talk more about the financial implications of this. and phone calls and all of that, there are certain things that we can, in these budgets, be able to free up money by deferring other things. That would not be one of them, though. Mr. Tufel?
Lou, the availability of the funds of $500,000, what are we expecting to use that for?
Right now, that we feel we can make that available to address, something that, that the board wants to do for the environmental project. If that's the wish
So
of
it's
the
a
board.
safety
Without
net then?
without the diesel release, we would be using that for
Other
rugs,
academic-
furniture, painting, driveways, all that kind of stuff.
So would we be using that as a emergency fund if the chiller goes
Well,
down?
we would assume responsibility for some expenditures of the project at this point, as much as $500,000 would purchase.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mrs. Guyon?
I just want to make sure that Danielle's question was answered because I didn't really hear it. So is it a question of keeping the chiller functioning and taking care of maintenance type of things that will keep it running? Or is it past that point where that's not what we're talking about, we're not able to maintain it anymore?
It's not recommended to try to keep it running. The repair cost to try to put new cores into the units is probably about $60,000, and the system itself was installed in 1999 in the building, so we're 19 years in, so it's at 20 years of useful life is when air conditioning systems start failing. So the estimate we have of about $150,000 for replacement. Our engineering consultant on this recommended we don't even consider the short term because you won't get enough years out of it
Okay.
to make it worthwhile.
All right, I think that's what you're asking, yeah. All right, thanks.
Mr. Sylvia, did you have something? I didn't know if I saw your hand. No, okay. Any further questions about the board CIP account? Okay.
Okay, so when we look at the totality of everything here, we have our board CIP account, then we have 3 distinct years of town CIP accounts, our non-lapsing fund, and the health benefits credit. So there's 6 moving parts that are interacting with each other here. So you will see that there is some duplication of items in different areas. Like you will notice that the, district-wide HVAC repair account in the 2017-18 town CIP, 30% holdback category, is there for $45,000. Those dollars were basically stripped out of the appropriation to compensate for the governor's shortfall. That was originally intended to be the resource for the Martin Kellogg project for the air conditioning replacement. Then when you go down to the next grouping called the town CIP frozen project, you'll see another $105,000 for district-wide HVAC repairs. That's still pending. It's under the freeze by the town, and that's, when I talked to the finance director earlier today, she was hopeful that, this would be able to be released, but it is pending the results of what happens up at the governor's situation in the next couple of weeks. And if it doesn't, then that entire allotment earmarked for Martin Kellogg will not be available. So that's why you see it over in the board CIP account, because if it doesn't happen in A, it has to happen in B because of where it is. It can't go away completely. So, unfortunately, I couldn't really, come up with a better approach to kind of educating everybody about the issues surrounding this, but just recognizing that, what happens in one place will very likely have an impact somewhere else as these accounts interact with each other.
And I want to jump in and talk about the 30% holdback on the current operating year's board town CIP account, because I don't think we've had the opportunity to discuss that at a board meeting before, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page as board members. So when the governor changed the legislature's budget and $3.2 or $4 million was cut from money that was going to be going to the town of Newington, the town council had to make decisions for how best to fill in that $3.4 million gap so that we didn't deplete the rainy day funds, so that they would still have the ability to borrow money through bonding. because they have to keep that rainy day fund at a certain level to be able to do that. So what they did was look at the CIP. Was first we all got the supplemental car tax bill because the state allowed the town to fund at the mill rate of the town, which before we were capped at a certain number. So there's the supplemental amount, which is about $1.2 million. The town held back some of their own CIP projects, and then from the CIP allotment that the board was given at the budget time last year, the John Wallace Phase 2 project for redoing those wings. For security reasons, $625,000 was stripped out. That was the entire amount. And then 30% of the other line items, which is what you see here, the school technology reserve, buses, school roof repair, HVAC repairs, school driveway sidewalks, and parking. So all of those amounts are 30%, and below on the frozen project side is 70%. So the rest of the money that we have currently in CIP still is on a freeze. And the reason for that is that no one's sure what the governor or the legislature is going to do in their February session to address what could be another state budget deficit. So in order to be prepared, the town council is freezing those projects. In case we get cut again or something weird happens, they will have money that hasn't been expended to be able to fill in the gap to try to protect taxpayers as best as they can. So when we look at the 30% holdback, the money that we will never be able to access because that money is filling in the hole that already exists, it's $857,000. So that plus the $1.2 million from new revenue from the second time of car taxes equals $2 million, and there's about a little bit more than $1 million that the town council filled in other ways that they've explained at their meetings. But I want to make sure we're all on the same page that as it impacted our town CIP account, $857,000 gone, and there's another another $541,000 in projects that are on a freeze right now. Mrs. Guyon.
Mine's not a question, but I just want to summarize to make sure that I am understanding what you're saying. Because when I looked at this, I was thinking, why do you have HVAC repairs in two separate places and now in a third place? So I'm going to summarize to make sure I understand it. Really, the 30% holdback and the frozen, that's really one section. That's CIP. Part of it was held back and part of it is frozen. So it's just separated out to show those two pieces. And then we're putting it over in our Board of Ed CIP because those things need to be done. We need to have funding for it. So it's there so that the funding is there in case we don't get any of the funding from this side.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
As the timing moves on with that, we're getting closer to the decision day where we have to move forward.
Right.
Because if we, funds aren't released, I'll just run out of time.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure because seeing it in three different places and hearing what you're saying, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying.
And another way to think about it is at CIP time last year, we got $150,000 for district-wide HVAC repair. 30% of it, $45,000, was held back, so we never accessed that money. $105,000, the remaining 70%, is still in the town CIP budget, potentially for us to use after the February legislative session is potentially when it would be released. But by that time, and considering how the legislature goes into special session every time they meet these days, by that time we may already have the need. So Lou, to be conservative and make sure we have access to some kind of money, is saying the $150,000 that's set aside in the public school CIP account, that may need to get used, so we can't commit to spending that on the diesel release.
And in the event that this money does get released, the frozen money gets released back to us, then this money would become available again.
It could potentially become available, of course, pending any other district-wide HVAC things that need to get done.
Okay.
Right, so if we're talking about, 6, 8, 10 months from now, we're not going to prognosticate. If everything stays the same and there is nothing else that money had to be used for to make sure that our schools were still functional, then potentially, yes, once money is unfrozen, if it's unfrozen, there could be additional money that could be available.
Yeah, I don't want to get to the end of the year and then we have money here and people say, well, I thought you spent all the money, where did it come from? I just want to make sure that I know where it's coming from so I can help explain that. Thank you.
There are other questions on the current year CIP?
Okay. I'll move over and speak of the two items in the middle column. The first being the health benefit fund credit that we get. This is the result of the joint operations between the Board of Ed and town of the health benefit fund. I annual cost number is established by the agent of record and then modified through the winter into the springtime, where a final number is established for the health benefits cost for the year. The town and board share a partially self-insured arrangement where there are both a individual stop loss and what they call an aggregate stop loss maintained to mitigate any risk in the fund. Because of this, the board and the town are able to share in any benefits of good claims performance over the years. In 16-17 school year, which generates the 17-18 credit, there was a net benefit of $573,205 for the Board of Ed through this health benefit credit. And this is typically made available to the board around October 1st each year. So, we got that somewhere around that point of the year to act on during the rest of the year. The $600,000 estimate is based on the trend line of where things are going this year through 6 months actual. I had January results to evaluate, and it's been good and steady right now, but like anything else, it's turned on a dime, and where we were, substantially ahead turns into being just okay, or it's even turned around where the costs have been greater than the expected costs. The actual costs were more than the expected costs. So I always am very cautious in presenting the options to the board about what to do with this fund, because if you do take and choose to utilize the credit prior to the end of the fiscal year, the board retains the responsibility and liability to fund any shortfall if it were to occur. So if you took $100,000 out of the credit to use now, you would be at risk if your budget, had a reversal for the rest of the year when it came to claims costs. So we typically just roll that over and always work from the actual rather than work from estimated. Okay, so the $600,000 is a possibility at this time, but it's not firm. Okay. This year, for the anticipated use of the health benefit credit, will be to buy Chromebooks for the students, some facility maintenance work, and also function as a backup because of the very volatile nature of special ed costs this year that we've incurred. There have been a high number of new outplacement cases that we've had to address that have not been typical of the last 4 or 5 years of school district operations. So we always have to make sure we cover that because, when we have students, they are our first obligation and our responsibility. And if the outplacement is required, we have to deal with it. And many times the kids come with an outplacement if they're moving from another location. So we just are basically taking over special ed decisions that are made by other communities. Any questions on this?
I want to point one thing out and have a question. So when we talk about doing facilities maintenance through a health benefit credit, what that essentially means is that we are using money in our operating budget for maintenance that was not budgeted at the last school year, which is a typical occurrence, which is why when we had discussion last week going over the budget book, it often the maintenance budget is what we actually spend is much larger than what we budget, because a portion of that money oftentimes comes from the health benefit fund that we get to be able to do additional maintenance. My question is for Chromebooks. So this is something that would be expended this year for next year's purpose?
Yes. Right. Putting the district in position for the deployment for the end of August.
Okay. Further questions on the health benefit? Mrs. Strauss?
Am I allowed to ask a question about the CIP because something just popped into my head?
I'm only going to allow you to ask a question.
Well, I appreciate
we can't let everyone go.
Okay, thank you. So, Lou, when we were doing the budget, leave me alone. You had mentioned that when we rent out our space as a board, we get the money, it goes into the CIP.
Correct.
How much, has that happened yet this year? Will that happen? Is it going to happen?
It happens routinely over the year.
Okay, so how much can we,
If I remember correctly, when we looked at the last 3 years' history, we were getting between $60,000 and $70,000 a year of facility income for rentals. And It's not necessarily the same organizations every year. Their plans change and their events, their booking change. So they come and they go. But that's been a pretty steady number. Other things that we have in addition to that is when we get tuition money from students who are coming from other places, going to school in Newington. And some of these occur when families move out of town and they want to maintain the continuity of their child's education for the year, so they'll pay tuition for the second half of the year, whatever it is. And then we also get reimbursement through the Open Choice program for special ed costs that we provide for students that are in the Open Choice program out of Hartford.
So do those payments, have they happened? Will they happen? Do they happen throughout the year? I'm just trying to figure out, like, this account, like, how much...
Is it already included in that top
Yes.
number? I think that's what she's asking.
The answer is yes, up through everything we've received through January 31st.
So that's already accounted for in that
Yes, some of the
1.1.
But
tuition
moving forward,
things,
we could get more possibly.
like the money that comes from the city of Hartford, is typically back-end loaded because we would bill them for the year around the middle of May, because when we have a good sense of what's going to be final for special education services that we're going to provide. And depending on when they cut the check, if they cut the check out of their account on June 30th, I won't get it till July 4th, July 6th, so it rolls over into next year. So I don't control the receipt side of that to be able to give you an absolute certainty, but it is pretty steady over the year. Between everything, we've been up $250,000 or more, each of the last 4 or 5 years.
And I want to point out, again, we've talked about this several times around the table, but that's one of the intricacies of the way our town charter works, is that if it were different and life were different, receipts for rentals would come into the board, and instead of having an operating budget account for community services where we pay for janitorial staff and utilities and the like for those kinds of events, it would offset and we would pay out of the rental, but instead we have to have an operating budget account specific for that, and the money that we actually receive goes into the public school CIP account based on our charter. And the same thing is true for the other expenses that we talked about. So when we have our special ed budget, we have to have a special education budget that is for everything that we're going to incur, even though we get money back from, for instance, the city of Hartford at the end of the year for special education services provided to open choice students. That money, however, doesn't offset the special ed budget. It goes into the public school CIP account. So, in turn, the public school CIP account then helps to maintain our facilities, which we are using more because of those different programs, but it artificially inflates both our operating budget and the public school CIP because there's no offset and they act independently of each other based on town charter. So, any further questions on that, Mr. Tufel?
The special education compared to last year, what percentage increase do you forecast?
We figure we're at least $600,000 higher this year than last year in actual costs. I haven't looked at the trend line on all of the outplacements in a couple weeks to see if there's been any movement on that. But the numbers have been substantial from the increase, and it's strictly related to just more students being outplaced.
Mr. Brandon?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Just to be clear, the money for the special ed outplacements, that was or wasn't used via the contingency fund?
Yes.
Am I jumping ahead? Okay.
Part of that motion for utilization of the non-lapsing fund was to set aside $450,000.
Right.
For it.
Okay. So
Just
that
been
so that was
volatile.
the additional expenses were done out of the health benefit credit.
Right.
Okay.
That's basically being reserved for the risk that's
The
associated
additional.
with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Further questions on the health benefit credit? Seeing none, if you want to continue on.
Okay, so I just touched on one of the key items that was part of the non-lapsing transaction that was part of the mid-year activities where we reallocated salaries and transferred expenses to the town non-lapsing account for this, and that was $1,216,854, and that was subsidizing this year's operating expenses. So there's a $5 balance left in the account at this point, unless additional resources can be found to generate new surpluses to direct into this account. So this is not a resource going forward as of what we have available. So everybody needs to know that money has been spent for continuing operations. And this is part of the budgetary discussion where we have $1,216,000 to make up on the baseline of next year's budget, because that is, right now, we're in an arrangement where the recurring financial support is not there for that, to pay for those expenses.
And you made a brief comment about what would we expect to be able to do anything to create a surplus at the end of this year?
Correct.
In our operating budget.
Right. The methods that we traditionally would have to use for generating a surplus is stop doing certain things or defer. You know, if it's a matter of leaving vacant positions open for a period of time, if it's a matter of canceling or taking different approaches to construction, renovation, repair work that goes on around the district, minimizing our supply inventory going into the succeeding year, which would not be a recommendation, because again, if you don't have anything to back that up, it's not really a prudent strategy to take. And many times the combination of all of these things that happen that create the potential for a surplus during the year.
And so when we talked last week as we were going through the operating budget for this coming year, some of the things we learned is that to create a surplus at the end of last year, to be able to move money into the non-lapsing account, we did things like stop buying supplies. We froze that account to create a positive variance, and also left a maintenance position open for a good portion of the year instead of filling that position in order to create. And that's when we say, people say that we found money or there's just money somewhere. There's intentional moves made to be able to have that money because we knew there was a need to create a surplus last year early enough that we could make decisions to do that. Okay. Further questions about the non-lapsing fund? Anything else, Mr. Sylvia? Go ahead.
Thank you. Do we have an understanding of the balance of our unencumbered operational expenses for this fiscal year?
Not to a degree of precision yet. That is a ongoing process that happens continually all throughout the year. You know,
Correct.
I
We
very much
get a report every month from the superintendent of our unencumbered operational balance. Do we have a current snapshot of what our unencumbered operational balance is at this moment?
If I ran a report, it would say what the unencumbered balance is.
Right. So is it possible, how hard is it to get that number?
At this moment, I'd have to go upstairs to go run that report.
Right. I do have an interest to try to have an understanding of the unencumbered operational along with these numbers also. See if there's any opportunity within our existing operational budget for this year. Basically,
I do believe that is the question that I asked Lou about whether or not it's something that we could expect to be able to create a surplus by making intentional decisions. And I think his response was that he wouldn't recommend it at this point based on the fact that we are getting rid of would potentially be getting rid of a lot of the flexibility that we would typically have.
and therein lies my question, Josh, is that we're only being given one option, which is tackle all the CIPs. I'd like to also be able to have discussion over what our unencumbered operational balance is at the moment.
And so I'm sure we'll be talking about how to pay for other bills going forward, and that's certainly going to be part of the discussion. I think because of the immediacy of the need to try to take money out of the operating budget right now, in my opinion at least, and we can have more of a discussion as a board if you want to look at other options before moving forward with an option to pay bills right now, but to take $400,000 out of our operational budget right now with 4 months left in the school year, I think would be incredibly reckless.
I disagree.
Okay, and we can have that discussion. I first want to get through.
That's why I was waiting
the
for
rest of the
the end of
presentation. I
this.
appreciate that.
All right, but I do believe we need to have in front of us all potential opportunities in order to have that information in front of the board for discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we'll certainly continue that discussion after Lou's done kind of going through everything. So I think what's left now is last year's CIP and next year's CIP.
Just one comment on this discussion item before we move on, is that the board needs to recognize that there are 50 to 60 individuals who are contributors, decision makers, participants in projects and other initiatives that are going on around the district. So this is a very iterative process. I would almost view it as like you're coming in for final approach if you're on a plane, a commercial jetliner, where as you get closer to the last day of the fiscal year, your numbers and confidence are much better for how everything works out. People who are not prepared with their projects and being finished at this point because of the cycle of the work that's being done, it may not be able to definitively provide a number that I have a high degree of confidence in as far as what's truly the status. We know where the paper that's processed so far takes us, but there are just many, many things going on behind it that haven't gotten to the point of being transmitted into purchase orders and other final commitments. So it's, I would not want to characterize it where we have perfect information as of today about where we will be on June 30th. I don't think it's a fair portrayal of, how this goes. And we can certainly make some educated guesses, but like anything else, the confidence level that where we will be June 30th gets better every day we get closer to June 30th. Okay, moving on. Ready to move on? Okay, so next part is just, we'll talk about the right-hand column, kind of an aggregate to start with. So we have the section which is 16-17 projects, which right now was phase one of John Wallace wing reconstruction, where there's just a few dollars under $1 million available for that project, within the town CIP fund. We then have the split for this 2017-18 CIP funds, where the $856,928 has already been held back, and we will not gain access to it. That money is being used to offset the revenue shortfalls from the state. And then there's the $541,000 we might get access to, depending on how everything works out with the governor's financial decisions and how they impact positively or negatively to the town. Hopefully this will be good news and be money that it's released to us in a month or so. But again, as we talked earlier about the Martin Kellogg roof chiller, at some point we have to take action irrespective of when money may be available through this fund. And if we are not able to act on it through the town CIP, we would look to the board CIP to pick up that particular project for ourselves. Okay. In the 2018-19 town CIP is the budget request at this point, which is showing $2,882,961. I also realized that when we put the original project package together here, you'll see there's $1,375,000 for John Wallace Wings Phase 2 and Phase 3. It says 2 and 2, it should be 2 and 3. That did not pick up the $625,000, which was lost through the essentially the cancellation of that funding from the town. So in order to get Phase 2 and Phase 3 done, we would need for that to go from $1,375,000 up to $2 million. Okay. One of the other things we're considering right now is if we have a different option that we could pursue with the John Wallace project in general. Since it's geared as a safety project with the initial intent to provide hard-walled classrooms class by class throughout the three wings, that is the $3 million project over the three wings. But as a short-term measure, if we needed to provide additional funds to be directed into other activities, we are looking at the possibility of trying to do a process of essentially hardening all the entrances around the octagon on the inside of John Wallace, to be able to provide at least the lockdown capacity for the entire wings and any other adjacent spaces that can be accessed from the Octagon corridor at the school. I've asked Richie Collette, our security director, to look into this and see if there are any proposals or viable ideas that are here. This certainly wouldn't be the absolute that we were planning for to provide that level of security and protection for the students, but it may have the ability to provide a measurable, substantial improvement for all the students in the school, and we'd be able to tackle that, on a much more immediate basis across the entire building instead of just one wing at a time over 3 years. Preliminary discussions I had with Mr. Collette was we might be able to put something together in the neighborhood of $200,000 for this work. So we could potentially free up a portion of that original $1 million authorization and make those funds available for other purposes, over, as this whole situation unfolds over the next few months. Okay? The specifics of which projects will continue or which ones won't is obviously could also be a matter of what the board recommends. You certainly could recommend to cancel some of the frozen projects if that was the wish of the group, or make adjustments in next year's town CIP proposals to also redirect funds for different purposes. So this is, as I was saying, you have many moving parts here, and trying to put together a package that definitely addresses and maintains the necessary ability for us to respond to real needs and issues around the district, as well as addressing where the level of support the board feels is appropriate for the other matters at hand. So, okay. Any questions on this?
Mr. Brandon.
The idea regarding John Wallace that you mentioned that Mr. Collette has come up with, does that get presented in the facilities committee? How does that go?
It has not yet. It was just a discussion that we started about 2 weeks ago as what our own brainstorming was kind of, what do we have for ability to deal with the situation, and that was one of the things that came out of it. So it's not a firm...
It's just a brainstorm right now.
Brainstorm at this
So this stuff was voted on in the past, right? So that idea of we can do it for $200,000, that sounds like it would have to be voted on separately, correct?
Yes,
in terms of,
right,
okay.
because it's also a town action that would need to be taken.
Right.
But
it's not just as easy, I'm just saying, it's not just as easy as let's just do it. We have to go through the process.
That'll be a much more formal process.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Further questions? Okay, so I'd like to open up for a board discussion about what we've just heard. The problem at hand that needs to be solved are there $875,000 in invoices that need to be paid. There is some immediacy to the payment based on the work that's being done, the continuing work, and the relationship with the contractors. So it is a problem that we do need to solve, which is the part of the purpose for the special meeting we have tonight. So I'd like to open it up for board comment on their thoughts about how to fund it, their comfortability with doing certain things. Right now, I'd like to keep it to the commitment of the $875,000. It's my hope and expectations that our discussions with the town council will continue, because as we've talked to them and they've talked to us, there is acknowledgement that there is a certain level at which the board may not be able to contribute higher than. And so right now, we'll talk about the 875, and there will certainly be more discussions both for us, for the town council, and for the public about how to fund the rest of the project, pending insurance, pending the entire scope of the project, and what it comes in at. So, Mr. Brand, I saw you with a comment.
More of a question, maybe you would know. Would this end up being an MOU with the town, or would it be us just paying the contractors directly the $875 balance, and then whatever happens moving forward?
The plan for right now would be we would authorize the administration to pay the $875,000 in invoices through the ways that we discussed tonight. There will be more invoices coming, obviously, so at additional meetings there will potentially be agenda items added to discuss further what to do. I haven't spoken, obviously Carol's out of town right now, the majority leader, or the mayor, or Beth. We haven't had discussions about a formal additional meeting to discuss what happens after X level. So, I don't know, but I do know that we're, obviously we're all on the same team, the town council and the board, and no one wants to see the board's operating budget and, the education of the students disrupted, and no one wants to see the taxpayers of the town have an enormous tax bill either. So we're obviously going to be working together further as we go through this process.
To be clear, was this given to the public, the email from Lou, or from Tanya?
Yes,
I'm sorry.
I believe there are copies out here. Yeah.
So the 875 is through the very end of January?
For one of the contractors. For a second contractor, it's through
waiting.
January 21st.
Gotcha. Okay. Right. Okay, thank you.
And the expectation, again, since it's not on this email, the expectation is that up to date, there's an additional $200,000 of work done that just hasn't been invoiced. So we do know that there is an additional amount coming. If it's this week or next week when the invoices get to us, I don't know, but we will deal with that, over the next couple of weeks. Mrs. Guyon?
Just looking at this, I think we can all agree this is a terrible situation to be in. Not something that anybody planned for or would have thought was going to happen. With that said, I thoroughly appreciate the work that's gone into finding funds that we can make available that are not in our operating budget, knowing how tight our operating budget is already, and how we have concerns going forward with our operating budget. So I'm thankful that this has been laid out this way, that these are funds that were available to us outside of the operating budget. It makes me very nervous to spend down this much money when we clearly have needs for it, but I also think it's really important to take care of the fuel spill. That's an immediate need for sure. So yeah, I guess my feelings are this whole situation stinks. I think this is probably the best way to go about it, because I think that taking money out of the operating budget would be hugely disruptive to our students, and that is the last thing that I want to see, is them to be disrupted, because I think that's not repairable. So I think those effects are much longer lasting. So thank you for putting the work into creating this document so that we can see where funds are, what's where it comes from, and what's not going to be happening when we take this money out of it. So thank you.
Lou, is it accurate that your thought on the best way to fund this initial set of invoices is to spend down the public school CIP in the amount of $500,000 and then to take from the John Wallace Phase 1? What's your point of order? Please use a microphone.
Point of order. I do not think that that's an appropriate question to pose at this time, given the agenda.
Our agenda is for the discussion of the financial implications
It
of this,
is.
and I'm asking.
However, you're asking an individual?
I'm asking one of our employees to give his opinion on the best course of action. He happens to handle the board's finances. I'm going to overrule your point of order and ask Lou again. Is your suggestion to use money out of the public school CIP and the John Wallace Phase 1? Is that your opinion of the best way to do this right now?
Thank you for considering.
You're welcome.
What I would suggest is, obviously I wrote this before I knew the direction of the conversation, and to try to be able to put together exactly the right recommendation based on where the discussion is going. What I would recommend to the board is we would try to take all of it out of the board CIP account. I would put aside the roof work for right now, as well as the other $75,000 between technology and the underground storage tanks. I would have to figure out how to reconstruct that in a way to try to address allowing some amount of funding to maintain its availability here. So as things change in the next few months, I can revisit this issue and see what other opportunities are available or how I would have to look at this again, in the next 30 to 60 days. I would definitely retain the Martin Kellogg chiller as really the number one go-to project that has to be done. And everything else has some time flexibility associated with it that we could work around. So if the board's desire is to try to provide immediacy of the $875,000, go take it all out of the board CIP account, and we'll work on the John Wallace project for, the future. So once I have better information from Richie as far as the options and it's a project the board is willing to consider, I'd be much more comfortable at that instead of trying to have a decision made on a vague, we might be able to get this done.
So it's a two-part decision for you. One is the immediacy of being able to use public CIP right away.
Right.
And the other portion is that you're not sure what we can do with John Wallace, but that there is a identified need to improve something, and that we're waiting for a plan to really take
Right.
form before spending any of that money.
Correct.
Okay. Mrs. Strauss?
Obviously, it's our responsibility to fix this and pay for it. So I agree the CIP fund is a good place to start. I do question, though, you said your suggestion would be to stop the roof work. My question would be, safety-wise, I work in a building where sometimes the roof leaks. We've got big buckets. You've got 100 middle schoolers walking through. So they did fix the roof because it's a safety issue. I know I'm stuck on the chiller. When my boiler was breaking at home, it was $900 to fix it. It was $18,000 to replace it. We chose to fix it. I don't know if this point, maybe just putting the Band-Aid on for $60,000, it saves us $90,000. If the leaking roof is a safety issue, I don't know if that's what we want to cut. And I don't know because I don't know where it's leaking and how bad it's leaking. But
Right. One of the things that, as long as I have projects open within the board CIP account, we have the ability to move money around and readdress things as priorities change. So I would not bring anything down to zero, even if I left $1 in the roof account. I can always revisit it next month and reallocate money from a different project. It just provides the flexibility to address what's important now.
And just so we're clear on that, when he says move money around, it's in the public school CIP account, there are dedicated account line items, and these are some of them, for everything that can be spent on a project. And so there's flexibility in that account to be able to, if there's more roof that needs to be done than carpeting, $25,000 can move from the carpet account into the roof account to be able to do that work. So that's how that kind of works.
The board does not have the authority to do that. It would need to come from the town.
No, the public school CIP
Right.
account.
Right.
So we can do that without the town.
Yes.
You can do it
On
just
the public school, we can.
On the public school
Okay.
side.
Yes,
All right.
not on the town CIP.
Yeah. And I just want to draw everybody's attention to the chiller at Martin Kellogg, that we did put the Band-Aid on it.
2 years ago.
Yeah. So we've had this discussion before. So it's gone.
It's on borrowed time.
Yeah.
Mr. Sylvia?
Thank you. So if I'm understanding correctly, the roof work at John Patterson and Newington High School could be deferred?
It would not be the preference, but if we're assigning priorities and the remediation work is now number one priority, that will be number one.
Thank you.
Lou, is it also something that can happen is that we obviously have a school roof repair account on the town side of the CIP. If we were then looking at a different project in John Wallace and freeing money up there and a roof need occurred, but we had already spent down much of our public school CIP account, we could then ask the town to take formal action to transfer money from the John Wallace project or any other project that is available in funds to a roof fund to be able to do work.
Correct. There's only one caveat to that, where they are not by charter allowed to make changes until after mid-year. So if we have a problem that occurs in August, we won't have the ability to really tap into the CIP.
But from now until
Yes, from now until the end of the year.
until
yes.
June 30th, they're able to make those adjustments. Okay. Mrs. Guyon?
I am concerned about the John Wallace wing reconfiguration, that as a safety concern, that does, I want to make sure that's not something that we're pushing aside, that it's something that's, you're looking at other ways of doing it, which I appreciate, but I want to make sure that that's something that's moving forward and not being put off any longer. I think that it's...
Well, as of right now, the project at its earliest could start June of 2019. The architect has not started work yet on this, and if we're in position by next February or so to be able to bid the job and be prepared to start over the summer of 2019, that is our most optimistic case right now.
Okay, so with that being said, does that allow you enough time to look at other options and still make something happen? Because I am very uncomfortable leaving that any longer than is necessary.
When I was having the discussions with Richie, it would be something we would try to do this year, because it wouldn't be tied into a large multi-phase construction project which has displacement of students and tearing the whole place apart. It's something we could do and work around at regular school operations.
Okay, so that's a project then that you would be able to research
Yes,
and
make a recommendation within a few weeks.
then actually complete
Right.
before the end of the school year, if that's
Assuming
something
the
that would
town
work.
council supports that reassignment of those dollars.
Okay. Okay, I just don't want that to be on the back burner, because I think that's
No,
really
I
important.
we wouldn't have approached it if it was something that was not achievable.
Okay,
It's just a matter if we feel it's good enough.
Okay.
Is what the issue is.
thank you.
I have a question, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Sylvia. So does that mean if we're spending down 875 in the public school CIP, it leaves just over 200,000, 150 of which you've made pretty clear you want to keep for the Martin Kellogg chiller?
Correct.
So when another batch of invoices comes in for $200,000, would that necessitate either taking money from the operational budget or asking the town council to take action on the town side CIP projects?
Either of those, depending on the guidance we receive from the board.
And do you think it's possible that by the time the immediacy of the next batch of payments, assuming we are also going to be paying for those, does the immediacy of that require that your plan for the John Wallace wing would have to be ready to go by then?
Well, just because the cost and the magnitude of the project is much smaller, to get a good conceptual idea of how to do it would not take us that long. We've already started some work, and as we vet this over the next couple weeks, I would think, certainly by the third week of February, we would have a pretty good idea what we could or could not do with it. And that would probably time out pretty closely to what the next stream of payments would need to be associated with the project.
Okay. Mr. Sylvia? Wonderful.
My apologies, that answered it.
Okay. Mrs. Braverman, Dr. Braverman?
Thank you. So would it be possible, being that we've made sort of statewide news and maybe Eastern Coast news, that we contact Google or Microsoft and ask about a grant or some kind of gift of computers based on our emergency situation? This could happen. Yeah.
That anything's possible, I guess. Maybe we could reach out to our vendor and see, since we have bought such a large amount of Chromebooks, if there's something that they'd be willing to do to try to help with the emergency situation that could impact our ability to continue the program.
Why not try?
Might as well try everything. Further discussion on all of this? Mr. Branda?
I think this was a setup, so I don't talk. I think it's just important to note that the two sides do appear to be collaborating, and I think that sometimes you may see that people are suggesting that the collective, quote-unquote, we are not taking this seriously, but I think if you look at this page, I don't know if is this going to be posted on our website or anything like that? Will it be available? Yes.
It should get appended to the agenda.
Added
since
to
all
it
of our
as an
materials
action,
go
okay.
with our agenda.
So I think, hopefully nobody thinks that elected Board of Ed members are not taking this seriously, or the staff. I agree with Emily. I think the most important thing right now is just kind of clean it up, pay our bills and keep our schools operating and running so that the students and teachers hopefully do not notice an impact right now.
Mr. Sylvia?
Motion to take $800,000 from John Wallace Middle School Phase 1 to be applied towards the invoice.
I appreciate the motion. My request, and we'll have to have a second before we discuss any further, but we do have an agenda item for an action item related to this, so if you would consider withdrawing the motion until we get to our action item.
Happy to withdraw it, waiting the agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further discussion on this financial impact with the board and where to spend money from, Mrs. Stam?
No, I just want to reiterate that I do agree that utilizing the funds here in our CIP accounts instead of going to operation budget is the right way to go. And I do really appreciate the time that's brought into this and the fact that we are collaborating as a town in a really big problem. Thank you.
Mr. Vasella?
I'd agree there. I think that taking it from the CIP board side is a good move. I also expressed my concern about Wallace, and I think I probably am saying it every meeting, and I'm speaking it again. But I'm glad to see that some effort is being made to secure that entrance and put some safety measures in at Wallace. Thank you.
Further discussion before I move on to an action item which necessitates further discussion on the action item? Seeing none, if anyone has a motion they would like to make. Mr. Sylvia, we can start with your motion.
Are we on item F?
We are moving on to item E, action regarding the diesel release.
Yeah, I do have a series of motions, but the motion that I'd like to reiterate is a motion to reallocate $800,000 from the John Wallace Middle School Phase 1, wing Phase 1, and apply it towards this invoice that we are now confronting.
And to clarify your motion, just so that it's understood that it's not an action the board could take unilaterally, but would have to request the town council consider it at a meeting. So I think to clarify your motion to be a motion to ask the town
Motion to ask the town council to reallocate $800,000 from the John Wallace Phase 1 towards the invoice.
Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Strohs. Is there discussion on the issue? I will say I think that I would rather follow the advice of Mr. Jacomowitz. I actually thought we were going to come into the meeting and he was going to say take some from Board of Ed CIP and some from Wallace project. But I understand the immediacy is the key factor for me because of the issue with vendors, and I don't know when the town council will be able to get together quick enough to be able to entertain that. I also, we retain flexibility either way to be able to do other things with the John Wallace money after, as there are going to be additional bills. So, I'm not going to support the motion. I'd rather see a motion to spend money out of our Board of Ed CIP account. Is there further discussion?
So then there would be...
Mr. Sylvia?
Thank you. So if I am understanding the clarification, we would have to wait for the town council to take action and we wouldn't be able to pay the bill immediately.
Correct.
All right, so then I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay. Is there another motion to be made regarding the diesel spill? Mr. Sylvia?
I'd like to make a motion to withdraw $875,000 from the BOE CIP for the current approximate balance of $1,096,325 and withdraw the
Motion exactly in that amount.
and pay the combined invoices to date of $875,785.34.
Is there a second? Mr. Vasella, any discussion on this? My discussion would be that I am in favor of this, obviously, since I didn't like the other one. I think that this is the best way to immediately pay the bill. We do retain some flexibility with the town CIP side. I don't really see another way to do anything right now, and this should not show up in any impacts in the operation of the actual school system. Any further discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Sylvia?
I'd like to make a motion to approach the town council to reserve
Well,
$800,000.
Can we wait for the first motion you've made too?
Oh, we haven't voted on it.
We haven't voted on it yet.
Thank you.
Mrs. Guyan, further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, does this, because I'm not doing this math in my head right now, does this reserve the money for the chiller or not?
It does, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Branda?
And just to be clear, the motion is based on the exact balance amount, right? I know originally you said 875, but it's for
And he-
875, 785.
He did
and
correct
34.
that,
Okay.
yes.
I
So
just wanted to make
based
sure.
on the information we have from the town manager and the invoices, this is the amount.
Okay.
Exact amount that is due right now on the invoices.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Mrs. Guyan?
Have we seen the invoices?
Lou has all of the invoices. I did flip through some of them with him when he received the first batch.
Okay,
So I can confirm they exist.
thank you.
I did not read all of them, though. Further discussion on this? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Mr. Sylvia, I do want to respect that you had another motion.
Yes. The first motion that I withdrew, I would like to ask the town council at their next opportunity to set aside $800,000 from the John Wallace Middle School, Phase 1 of $1 million, and set aside $800,000 for any future invoices that may be coming our way to provide immediate response and cash flow to the invoices that we would incur.
Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Droz. Is there discussion on the issue? Mr. Branda?
Question on the upcoming invoices and the upcoming work. I just want to either be clear or just get an understanding of this. The Board of Education itself will not have any say on any of the future work, correct?
I'm not sure that's an entirely fair characterization.
Or-
Mr. Giacomoz, can you explain
Yeah,
how
if
the
you could
decisions are
explain
being
how that
made right
works.
now that incur costs?
Right now, the industrial hygiene consultant is really the individual steering the ship as far as the design of the work that needs to be done. All of that is in response to meeting the expectations of the regulations for the Department of Environmental Protection. So until we get past the point of being in a remediation phase, his decisions will really lead the whole group as far as where we're going. Once we get to the point of restoration work only, there'll probably be much more involvement and engagement as far as what that will actually look like as far as the finished product, what ideas and brainstorming occur that will take that space and maximize its utility to the town in what we want to do. So, and we just haven't gotten there as a group. Everything's been on the immediacy of the remediation issues right now. But that, I can definitely see that happening probably within 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Droz?
I just want to say that I agree with this motion because I just think it's important that we look forward into the what-ifs. Like, what if we have another $800,000? What are we going to do? We don't want to touch the operating budget because that will hurt our students, and we don't want that. We have a responsibility to our taxpayers. We have a responsibility to our town to clean it up. So I like the idea of knowing if this comes again, we don't have to sit around and debate where this money is going to come from to know that it could possibly, we have this option. I just think it's smart planning.
Mrs. Guyan?
I just need clarification, follow up on Mike's question about our involvement in it. So when we get to that second phase, if we're paying the bills here, I want to make sure you will be involved or that someone from the school side will be involved in the planning and the hiring
fully
and
expect
execution
that
of
to be the
that
case.
plan?
I fully expect that to be the case.
Okay. I just want to
But
make
as
sure.
right now, it really hasn't been on the radar screen of, just based on what we've needed to do over the last 4 weeks, just for the project itself, for the
Okay.
remediation part.
So I can understand how to this point we don't have much control over what's happening because
Right. And some
it's
of
in
it
someone else's hands, but I want to make sure that when it comes down to having some control over it and controlling our expenses, that we do have a say in that, that's
Right.
all.
Right. One of the things that will be a major, influencer of the decision is what they ultimately decide to do with the bus garage itself. All of our preliminary indications are it will be less expensive to just knock the bus garage down and start over than trying to work around it with a long-term monitoring costs that go with basically an incomplete site. If we don't get all of the contamination out, you would then need to keep your eye on it through a well system for a number of years until it's proven that all of the contamination is inert or is left, or if it's still active, we have to keep monitoring. So, we have three choices right now. We can demolish the building in its totality. We could only demolish part of it, which is where the contaminant is below that portion of the slab, where the third part is try to work around it, leave the building intact, and put in the long-term monitoring and remediation items. And the most cost-effective approach was to take the garage down. And part of it also is because the size of the garage doesn't fit the current sizes of the buses. So we're kind of not able to use it in its maximum utility the way it's configured right now. So in those recommendations, the recommendation is to do that as long as the cost advantage is associated with it. And if you now have a basic open site as a result of the work, you have a lot more flexibility in your decision-making compared to if you were working around an existing structure. So that will be figured out in the next few weeks.
Further discussion from the board, Mr. Brandon?
So I'm just wondering, as we're talking about the 800,000 from your motion, and that's based, I assume, off of the idea that Lou mentioned with Mr. Klett, right? That the 200,000, right?
That's generally driving the concept of saying, asking the town council to reallocate the 800,000 so we can apply, so that it can be applied towards it.
Yeah.
I might be kicking myself in the derriere if Mr. Klett comes back and says, oh, this is not feasible at all to create a individual trap or individual traps to help secure the wings.
Yeah.
But I'm confident in Mr. Klett's ability and such a concept coming up has been done at other locations that I know of. So, I believe it might bear fruit.
I'm just wondering about the, sticking on that 200,000. If that, we're talking about taking 800,000, it's a defined, when we say that we're asking for permission, that doesn't mean we have to use that, correct? So we're asking the town to say, can we use 800,000 of that project?
I'm honestly not sure how that procedurally would work, because it sounded like it would be, we're asking the town to reallocate $800,000 into a new line item to be spent on, or they already have a line item that has nothing in the back, but $800,000 would just go into their fund for whatever the fund is named. My personal hesitation is that we, along with that, we hamstring ourselves already into having $200,000.
Right.
I don't think there's a great immediacy because we have currently scheduled meetings each of the next Wednesdays, and there are no current invoices that won't be paid. I also have a really big concern with how our human capital development offices and our transition academy are being moved and funded during the town hall renovation. As we know, there's only $100,000 in the referendum money to be spent on relocation purposes, and so the estimates that we have right now to do those relocations far exceed $100,000. My concern is that bills come in and the town council makes decisions to pay the money out of the fund that we've transferred money from John Wallace out of, maybe not even being able to do anything about John Wallace because of that, and then there's no money left over for us to be able to fund relocation expenses, which greatly concerns me, and I think it needs to be part of a discussion we have with the town council about moving forward. What's the amount expectation from the board? Where is it going to go? Is there money going to be expended by the town council? If it's the opinion that the board fronts everything, is there the opportunity for us to be able to pay out of future health benefits potentially on this one specific item? Is it a better option for us to be able to try to create the same kind of, or not the same magnitude, but some kind of surplus in our operational budget that won't impact based on trends in the current year? I see a lot of different moving parts, and as we can see, there's 6 different columns in this together. To hamstring us and give, not that we don't trust the town council, but to put $800,000 in a fund to pay down bills that will assuredly be coming, it's common sense that that money would then be spent, and our flexibility would be completely ruined without having a master plan for how to deal with all of these different moving parts together with the town council. I just don't
That's
just
kind of
don't
where
think
I was
it's
going.
wise.
I think you
It
said it a
was,
little bit
and
more
I jumped on
eloquent
your-
than I did,
I
but
jumped on that, but
you got it.
those are my thoughts on it. So Mr. Sylvia with a response?
Josh, I appreciate, your thoughts and such. I mean, it makes sense. But however, it's much more important to me that we demonstrate our commitment to the town council to take ownership, and therefore we've got to change our priorities. So along that line, that's generally what's driving I'm seeing right now that we're a potential cash flow of obligations of $3 to $5 million. And I want to demonstrate to the town council and to our residents that we are committed to this, and that's why I want to try to reset the priorities and the commitment. I understand the fluidity. It might be this, it might not be that, but I think it's easily going to be over $3 million. And thus my penchant to and desire to try to at least get all of the commitment somewhat lined up in that line, and that was the purpose for my motion.
I can certainly appreciate that. And my only retort, and I'm probably out of comments after that, is that I think that our number one priority will never shift, and that's to provide the best education we can for our students. And I think that along with that, we have shown our commitment so far to the town. We have said, and I certainly have said over and over again in council meetings here and in private conversations, that we're committed to moving forward, but I think it needs to be done together, and I think it needs to be done in a way that catches all of these different moving parts into one real plan, because one of the main issues I've seen as we've operated over my time being a public official is that we tend to handle one thing in the air at a time, and we lose track of some other things, and because of that we find ourselves in different jams, and I don't want to see that because of the diesel release. So I think it's important to have a real plan for all of these different moving parts together, and certainly by not approving the motion, if that's what happened, would we be telling the town that we're not going to be able to give any more money to the projects? I don't think that that's anything that we'd be saying. I think what we're saying is it's responsible to be discussing this together, to make sure that we have a plan for all of these moving parts, including town hall renovation, the need for maintenance at our own building, our operational needs, and the need to clean up the diesel release, which is obviously a high priority for us. So that's my last response. Mrs. Guyan had a hand up.
It's similar to what you've said. I think that I feel like we've so far worked really well with the town council. I think that we've shown them our commitment to dealing with the project. I think we've done a lot of work today to try to make good on the bills that have come due this week. I hope that they and the town feel that from us and understand where we're coming from there. But yeah, I would be uncomfortable at this moment asking the town council to move the money out of there, because I do think that then we're tied to that, and I'd rather, instead of speculating what's coming, I would rather, since we do have so many meetings scheduled already, I would rather take it a little bit more slowly and see how things transpire, and again, come up with a more solid plan so that we don't get into a bind.
Is there Mrs. Stam?
I agree. I would like to see us have another meeting with the town council to discuss these options and these ideas before we go ahead with further things. Just like you said, there's a lot of things, unknowns and moving things and those kinds of things, and I don't feel comfortable making or agreeing to a motion at this time without another conversation together collaboratively with the town council. And I do agree with Mrs. Guyan. I do think that we are showing good faith effort and that we are working collaboratively as a group together. So I wouldn't support that motion right now.
Dr. Braverman?
So for the bus garage demolition, the next steps would be, I know it's preliminary, we would have a meeting with an architect, or what would happen next?
Lou, can you feel that? What would happen if the bus garage had to come down?
It would come down, the site would be remediated, which would extend the big dig that's there.
I think specifically in terms of how the process for how the garage gets down from someone making a determination to someone actually knocking it down.
Okay.
Yeah, all of it, half of it?
Well, it goes in multiple steps. The first step is in working with the insurance carrier, making sure the proposal for the work meets their expectations of coverage. We certainly don't want to be moving ahead and doing things that will not allow ourselves to be reimbursed for the expense to restore things the way they were. The next step is the assessment of the existing building for any other hazardous conditions, and this is for asbestos, lead, PCB type issues. The preliminary assessment that was done was that that's minimal in nature. Okay, so presuming there's a little bit to be done, you have the first part of demolition that occurs just carving out those hazardous material elements. So like if it's a PCB project, you would be stripping out only those parts of the facade of the building which are considered contaminated, and you'd leave everything else behind. Then once that's cleared on the site, you could engage in just a straight demolition of the building that's all non-hazardous. So the removal of the rubble, could actually go back as fill for the site, or it could be used and, sent off to just a landfill someplace if that was the preference of the town and how the future design of the space would be. Then you get into the restoration work, which is the fill, the stone, the compacting, setting the grades, and determining if you're going to just blacktop the whole area or if you're going to put a structure up or make provisions for another tank system on the space. We would need to include any decisions about electrical service in the area for all the bus plugins, as well as lighting for the area and potential security that's there. So, this is all kind of the evolution of what the project would be. And this would not be a highly complex project compared to some that we've done in the past. And it would be, probably once the design decisions are made, you could probably have it completed within 3 months.
Mr. Brandon?
With regards to the motion, I can appreciate the thought. I see and hear where you're coming from. I think it's just, I would rather make sure that we're collaborating with the town council on this. I know we talked about a committee at the very end of that last joint meeting that we had, and I would just rather work within our schedule. It's not as though we are not meeting anytime soon. I think we're here tomorrow. I know we have budget stuff to do, but when you talk about adjusting our priorities, we can always, adjust our priorities with our meetings and insert these sort of discussions into those meetings, I think. So that's why I won't support it right now, but that doesn't mean that I disagree with your logic or your mindset.
And I do just want to make a quick point that's slightly off topic, but I believe I can overrule any motions for order anyway. So in the event there's snow tomorrow night, forcing us not to have a meeting, we have filed an agenda to have a meeting on Thursday in place of that. I don't know if all of you got word about that yet, but I didn't want to miss a week, so hopefully we can have a meeting either way, because I didn't want to miss a budget meeting. So that's my 2 cents right there. Object to having a meeting on Thursday, or object to me talking about it?
I had a date with my grandson, but...
Well, I hope that we will be able to have, because even if there's not school, we can still have a board meeting. It's just, if the roads are safe for us to travel, obviously we'll get an email to everyone to let them know that it is happening tomorrow, but that's my expectation. But Mr. Silvio, we can also just send you the NCTV recording of the meeting, or have you call in during it, because I know my parents would agree that grandkid time is incredibly important. Further discussion on the motion, Mr. Vasella.
Just going along, I agree with Mr. Sylvia in wanting to move ahead, but I also look at the other possibilities, things that can happen. And I guess I would have to say that I would much prefer to wait and go on a case by case or invoice by invoice, meeting by meeting time, rather than commit ourselves for that full amount of money tonight.
Any further discussion before we vote? So we are voting on the motion to ask the town council to move $800,000 from the Wallace project into the diesel release project. All in favor?
Wait a minute.
Are you in favor of your own motion?
Yes, I'm in favor of that motion.
Opposed? All right. Mr. Tufel, are you abstaining? Mr. Tufel voted yes. The motion fails 2-7. Mr. Sylvia?
Motion to reserve the health benefit fund credits to be allocated towards future invoices.
And you're talking about the 17-18 credit that came in?
The current 17-18, the other is just an estimate. We don't know it yet.
Is there a second on that? I will second it just so we can discuss it. I think that's appropriate. Or Mr. Tufel seconded it? Okay. My discussion would be repetitive of the last motion, especially since this is an operational budget and we don't know what we could potentially need that for. So I would be opposed as well. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, the purpose of mine is basically to have funds readily identified and available to the town so that in case something else crops up over the next 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever, or something else needs to get knocked down, or God forbid, Garfield Street needs to get dug up, and all these other estimates that have been tossed around, that the town manager has the confidence that the funds have been allocated on our behalf towards that so that they are comfortable in moving forward. So that or otherwise we're going to have another special session because, oh, here comes another set of invoices.
I certainly understand we do have meetings every Wednesday the rest of this month already set. So I personally can't foresee a situation where there's such dire need that we would have to have another special session. Those are my 2 cents, and I would echo everything I said before.
My desire on that is to demonstrate our commitment and having funds readily available and basically create a resounding confidence amongst our residents and the town council that we're open and capable of.
So similar to the last motion then, and does anyone have anything different to say than the last motion? Mr. Brandon?
I just have a question. So within that line item, does that money have to be approved by the town?
That's not a line item. That is just in our operational budget.
Right.
The way that works procedurally, and I swear after 7 years I almost have this right, is that a credit comes in that's available October 1st of 2017. So right now, just to use round numbers, say we have to put $1,000 in the 17-18 school budget for health benefits. Right. And October 1st, the agent of record comes back and says, you got a $100 credit. So what winds up happening is that we now only have to pay $900 out of that health benefits $1,000 that we had, and we have $100 that still sits in the health benefits account but doesn't need to go to pay health insurance. So that $100 can, and that's what we do twice a year, at the mid-year and at the end of the year when we transfer funds. Some of those funds that get transferred are the health benefit credit. It's never a separate amount of money. It just decreases what we actually have to pay in the current year. So it's money that it's just sitting in our operation budget in health benefits right now, can be moved at any time, and then at the end of the year we reconcile the budgets with our transfers.
So can I just get a clarification on the motion? Are you asking that we actually move it, or you are just saying that you would like us to commit verbally to using that credit for the next invoice that comes up, basically?
That would be my general intent, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Droz?
I have an easy question, so bear with me. So when we first got on the board, we were handed a piece of paper that transferred money from certain accounts because they
Correct.
need reallocation of funds?
Correct.
Is that the right name?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. You can say what it was. What was that thing called? That
Yeah,
piece
no,
of paper?
I mean, that's the only word that's coming into my mind.
Okay. Thank you. So if, I just want to understand.
Budget transfers, Dr. Collins.
Thank
Westbury.
you. So the budget transfer sheet, and then that
Yes.
happens again in June.
Correct.
So budget transfers are made without, we don't now have to approve them, we kind of approve them after the fact?
Correct. So essentially, as the board body, as a policy body, we set the budget, we talk about parameters. Throughout the year, if anything incredible happens, for instance, the special education overages, we get updates on we're going to have an overage in this account. When buses are being spent out of money, we usually get an update saying buses are going to be bought, technology, things like that. So at the end of the year, we have an idea about the overarching things. If there's $30,000 more in math than there was in social studies, those kinds of day-to-day things, that's not something that we get updated on regularly since it's not our purview to manage the actual money that's in those accounts.
So then I have a question about Mr. Sylvia's motion. If we voted yes, so then that money couldn't be transferred out for a given amount of time until this whole situation is cleaned up into a different account without us knowing? Am I understanding that's the motion?
Essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if Dr. Collins ever received word from the board that this is how we have to spend our health benefit credit, he would honor that barring something extraordinary, to which he would bring it to us.
Okay.
Yeah, typically that's what I do. I will bring you a list of choices for the health benefits. Lately, it's just been, there hasn't been really a lot of choice the last couple of years, but we don't make any transfers. The board makes all of those. The one in October typically is once we know who we've hired, since we don't know ahead of time, then we know who those people are by October, and all that stuff is settled. So now you know where to put the money in that. So that's why that happens. And then, as the chairman said, throughout the course of the year, you could have overages in special ed and things like that, and you also have the health benefits credit. Typically, the board decides, what you want to spend it on. But then, if we do have the overage, then that money would have to be transferred to special ed. But we don't do that. The board does.
Right. In my first couple of years on the board, that October meeting when we get the health benefit information, we've actually chosen items on the list to be spent money on throughout the year. In the past 2 years, or maybe even 3 even, we've not had choices because of special ed and maintenance. And so it's been slightly different, but that's how that had worked in the past. Go ahead, yeah.
But there is money in there, so this 17-18 actual, was that?
That is the actual amount that we have to spend on health benefits than's in our operational budget.
Okay, so it hasn't been earmarked for anything necessarily as of today?
As of right now, and you look on here, the anticipated uses are for Chromebooks, maintenance, and special ed overages, which we already know there are, even after we put in $450,000 from the non-lapsing fund. So they're not earmarked, per se, but they are pretty good guesses of where that money would need to go in order to continue the current operations. Mr. Branda?
Maybe you said this, I don't know. Do we have an estimate right now of the special ed cost?
I think he said it was $600,000 over.
In the vicinity of 600.
That was the...
Okay. 450 of which
we already
did with the non-lapsing count. So right now, an additional $150,000 we could expect, and who knows what happens the rest of the school year.
Gotcha. I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Is there further comment on the motion to earmark the 573 in health benefits for the purposes of the diesel release? Seeing none, all those in favor of that motion? All opposed? Motion fails 4-5. Is there anything further, Mr. Sylvia?
Same motion with the 2017-18 town CIP frozen projects of totaling $541,166, asking that those be reserved and allocated towards this environmental issue.
And that's with the caveat, if they're ever released?
If they're released, I'm going to give the town council some incentive to release it, but I would like to have the funds allocated.
Is there a second on the motion? Seconded by Mr. Vasella. Does anyone have any discussion that differs than the last couple motions? Mr. Branda?
The incentive that you're going to offer the town would be what?
Beer.
Oh, gotcha.
Humor aside, it's fundamentally is the same logic, is that I'm looking to make a commitment to the town council that we're willing to have these funds allocated towards the environmental
So
issue.
your incentive is good faith. That's what you're trying to say. And I think we've kind of said it a lot in that I don't think even on the last one, nobody's saying that they don't want to work with the town council on any of these funds. It's just we want to make sure that whatever we're allocating, we know what we're allocating it to. So that's, again, I can appreciate your thought process and I understand what you're trying to do. I just would rather see the work done and see from there where we need to take the money out of, and since our meeting schedule will allow us to have those fluid conversations, that's why I will not support it.
Mrs. Guyon?
I think that our work here today and everything that's on this paper and all the ideas that we've thrown out and discussed, I hope are taken as a good faith effort in our willingness to work with the town council. I mean, it's not just a willingness to work with the town council. I think we have to. It doesn't make any sense not to. We're all trying to solve the same problem, so it behooves us to feel that way. So I feel like everything on here are our ideas, and as things change, I'm not willing at this moment to commit anything to one specific area. I think that we've highlighted a number of places where money could come from, and in an effort to be fiscally responsible to our students, I will not support it at this time. We'll kind of wait and see as things come up, and again, we can have these conversations every single week as things change, because we do have meetings scheduled. So I would rather wait and then make decisions based on what comes in, so that we can make sure we're making the best decisions and not just rash, knee-jerk decisions.
Is there any further discussion? Mr. Sylvia?
Ms. Guyon, I do respect, and Mr. Brand, I understand your positions in wanting to have the fluidity and the options available to us at the future. But it's important to me that we have to make a commitment, because these, only for the set of invoices in front of us.
If you could just let him finish so we can...
And I appreciate the dialogue. It's important to me to make the commitment to the community and the town council that they have an understanding where it's going to come from. We're just a little bit blind because we don't have the unencumbered balances for the operational expenses for us to evaluate. So what type of monies are available? Generally speaking, in the operational balances, we have a lot of breakage monies that become readily available in each of the accounts, and that generally, historically, has been driven back to maintenance and allocated as such, and there might be another $1 million sitting there in breakage. I know for a fact our Director of Transportation will be retiring and enjoying, and we don't have a need at this time for hiring. So without that evidence there, this is the only way I know how to basically take the information presented to us, which is CIP type monies, and make the commitment to the town. So therefore, that's my passion, that's my plea. I want to make that type of thing. I do respect and I understand wanting to have the fluidity to address the invoices as they come in. I understand that dialogue. It's more important to me to show the commitment, thus my motion. Thank you.
And I think one of our earlier discussions is important, that when we're talking about what the magnitude of this is going to be, the closer we get to the end of the year, week by week, Mr. Jacomowitz is able to look at all of that information and determine if there are positions that he can intentionally not hire, and Dr. Collins and the whole staff, if there are projects that don't have to go ahead this school year and can wait till next one, if there are supplies that don't need to be purchased, if there's anything we can do to intentionally create a surplus, it behooves us to wait to be able to have that kind of flexibility. And we did talk about how we have meetings every single Wednesday coming up, and we can add agenda items to them up to 24 hours in advance, and we can ask Mr. Jacomowitz, as I'm sure he's doing on a daily basis, to look at those kinds of things to see if there's better options than looking at what we've looked at tonight. Which is why I thought it was important to talk about
Thank you for that point, Josh,
tonight's
because
invoices.
I've got my next motion in front of me. Thank you.
Is there further discussion on this motion? Mrs. Stamp?
I don't support the motion, but I do think that, I think we should just put for the next, at least the next 3 meetings, this as an agenda item that we're going to address that, give an update, something like that, so that we know, and then we'll know if there's another, invoice that we might have to address. And then I respect the fact that Lou will update us on our accounts, and then he can recommend where best to take that on an ongoing basis. So that's what I think we should do.
Is there any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all in favor All opposed? Mr. Vasello was abstaining? Opposed. Motion fails 3-6.
Thank you.
Mr. Sylvia?
Thank you. Motion to request a hiring freeze on all operational from today forward, so that until such time that we understand our full commitment on this environmental disaster.
Is there a second on the motion? Seconded by Mrs. Strohs. Discussion? Mr. Sylvia?
Thank you. Per your comments, Josh, basically the only reason why I'm bringing this up is because we have no idea of what our unencumbered balances are and the obligations and decisions that are currently available to our superintendent and to Mr. Jacko Talou. To that end, I question any decisions that they would be making and the further obligation of funds impacting our operation. Therefore, I would ask for a freeze of new hires with the explicit, unless he has the explicit approval of our board.
I have several comments. The first of which is the next time we have a meeting and you want to make 6 or 7 or 8 motions, I'd just appreciate, and I know you don't have to, but I'd appreciate a heads up just so we can all know what's going to be coming, so we can prepare for this kind of thing and be able to look into any of these motions that are happening. So I would just appreciate that kind of respect moving forward.
I thank you. I will.
The second comment is I can't imagine any situation in which I would ever support this kind of motion. It's not our job to micromanage the superintendent of schools in terms of hiring decisions. It is not our job to determine whether or not a special ed tutor needs to be hired. It's not our job to determine whether or not an art teacher needs to be replaced. It's not our job to do any of those things. To not impact the educational system and to provide the best education we can is of the utmost importance. And to think that we should ever be at a meeting of Board of Education where we are approving the hiring or firing of anyone other than the superintendent is beyond me, and it's outside of our statutory authority.
I'm not asking for firing,
I'm opposed
Josh.
to that, and I am going to ask for any other discussion on the motion.
Yes, I have a lot more discussion.
I'm going to go to Mrs. Guyon first.
Thank you.
I also will not support that. That does seem way out of our area of our jurisdiction, and that would have immediate impacts on students in a negative way, and there's absolutely no way I would support that.
Mr. Brando?
I also will not support it for many of the reasons that Mr. Schulman mentioned, but I guess my main concern is that it's just an arbitrary freeze without knowing or really knowing the process that maybe current applicants are going through right now, maybe somebody's about to be hired, maybe there is an immediate need that principal has seen in their school, and I think for us sitting around this table to not really have any grasp on that and then to put a freeze on it is pretty reckless, and I think that's why we hire a superintendent and they hire their staff to hire.
Further discussion? Mr. Sylvia, do you have anything else?
I shall remain quiet at this time.
Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor? Opposed? Mr. Tufeld, did you opposed? Or in favor? Opposed. The motion fails 1-8. Anything further?
Thank you very much, Mr. Schulman. I appreciate it, Josh. No, I have no other motions this evening.
Thank you. Seeing no other action to be discussed at this time, we'll move on to item F, public participation on any matter related to board responsibilities. We did. Okay. I got confused whether or not we actually passed one, which we did, thankfully. Okay. The phone line is ringing right now. It's Mrs. Good evening, Rose.
Hello, Rose Lyons, 46 Elton Drive. I think I've been going to too many of these meetings and multitasking while I was watching your meeting. I also had a call from Florida that I had to take, so bear with me, and I know that you don't answer the questions, but maybe tomorrow I could talk to someone in the superintendent's office. Last night at the town council meeting, I thought that it was said at some point in time that between the insurances and some of the CIP, monies, whether it be from the town or from the Board of Ed, that they hoped not to have to use up to the $5 million in bonding. I just would like to know what the invoices are to date, what is expected from the insurance company, what is expected from the Board of Ed. Are we paying the invoices before the insurance company pays a claim? I've had claims at my house, and usually the insurance company pays, and then I have to pick up the difference. In following this, what I'm gathering is that there was a spill, and then in trying to correct the problem, another spill occurred. Who takes the responsibility for that? And as far as monies being allocated at this point, I can see where people would object to approving anything tonight without seeing something in writing. I'm looking at the proposed pay-as-you-go CIP request for fiscal year 18-19 that was handed out on January 22nd, 2018. And there's a line item for John Wallace Class Wings reconfigurations, and it says original department request $1 million, and then the revised by the town manager, she recommended $1 million. But that night, and I could be mistaken, I thought they took that off as item number 29 and said that they were going to use $800,000 of that for remediation, and they moved $200,000 to line 38, school bus replacement program. Now granted, this is only a proposed CIP request that's going to go in with the upcoming budget, but as a taxpayer, as a resident, I'd like to see who's going to pay what before anything gets paid. I don't think they've done more than 6 weeks worth of work, and now there's this big rush to pay them. Can we just sit back, take a breath, look at the bills, look at what's available, and decide where it's going to come from? I have no doubt that you're going to take care of it, but this motion after motion after motion is making my head spin. So if I can speak to someone tomorrow, I certainly would appreciate it. And I wish that, you just do what you did like tonight. Sit back, think about it, and have something in front of you to look at rather than banging out numbers here and there. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosen. You're welcome to call me tomorrow as well. And she did jump in before I can announce the phone lines are open at 860-665-8736. Microphone. Thank you.
Maureen Klett, 104 Harold Drive. I would like to thank Mr. Schulman for your explanation on how the Board of Education is supposed to run. The Board of Education and the Town Council are policy setters. They do not run the day-to-day operations of our town. That is what we pay very qualified people to do. So I do appreciate the fact that you didn't support Mr. Sylvia's motion to try to handcuff our Board of Education, the employees. Secondly, you talked a lot about buses tonight, and one of the things that I did read on Facebook, which seems to be a place where a lot of us get our news these days, is that people had remarked about possibly doing away with our own bus program. And as a grandparent who put my 2 granddaughters on one of our school buses this morning, I could assure you that if there were any attempt to try to do that, I think you would have a great turnout of parents who would object to that, type of activity, because there have been studies that have been done well before probably most of you or all of you were sitting at this table. I know that one goes back to when Mr. Wright was mayor. I know there were others that were done before Mr. Wright. I know there were others that were done, studies that were done after former Mayor Wright, that demonstrated that there would not be any cost savings. But it's not just the cost savings to the parents of this community. It's the safety of our children and our grandchildren. And there is something to be said for the fact that we know, and who's driving our buses, we know that we can count on them, that we can depend on them, that our children are safe with them. And we would not have that same level of comfort or security or safety with people from DATCO or wherever else you would get them. And it goes beyond our children. It goes to a number of times within this community where we've had to call our buses out. One of them I can think of was when we had a police officer that was killed in this town, and there were, I think, 3 or 4 buses that were called out so that the neighbors could be safely taken out of their homes and sheltered during a very bad period of time. There was also other issues within our school where we've had to transport our students. I think one of them that I can recall was a situation over, I believe, at Anna Reynolds when there was an incident that occurred that required moving the students out. And there is no concern or delay in being able to safely remove our children to a safe spot. So I would strongly suggest that if there's anybody out there that's going to take into consideration the people that believe that that would be an okay thing to do, that you think twice, because I have no doubt from being around this table, the town council table, for a period of 30 years, that you will indeed see parents will turn out to support our own bus program.
Thank you, Mrs. Klett. Mr. Bichond, if you're still watching, called twice. Please call back and I'll hold for a... There we go. Good evening. Mr. Bichond?
Hi, thanks for taking the call again. I thought I wasn't getting through for some reason.
Sorry about that. Can you just say your name and address?
Yes, John Bichon, 56 Maple Hill. I'm only a very casual follower of Board of Ed policy and meetings and operations, but I just want to give you my opinion of, and I only caught part of this meeting where I saw at least 3 or 4 of those motions rejected. I want to give you what the casual observer's optics are of it, and that is, fair or not, that there seems to be a defending or deflecting blame. I know that you'll probably jump up and down and say that I'm wrong, but just casually observing and seeing and hearing some of the comments, that's what I'm taking away from it. So I just wanted to let you know how it looks to the public. I think that's about it, and thank you again for taking the call.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is there any further comments?
Good evening. Okay. Good evening, Wayne Alexander.
If you would just hold a second, we have another call coming in.
Sure.
Good evening, Dawn.
Hi, you want me to go?
Yep.
Okay. Dawn Oliveira, 18 Tunstall Road. There was a lot of discussion about Chromebooks, and I have been wondering for a while now what happened to the Chromebooks of the 10th through 12th graders that received their Chromebooks last year. I understand that the 10th graders will bring them now to their junior years and juniors to senior years. So what happened to the Chromebooks of the seniors? I thought it would be a good opportunity for savings to give the seniors' Chromebooks to the incoming third graders? So at some point, if you could probably answer that question. And also, I want to say thank you. Much of the conversation tonight explained a lot of the moving parts in attempting to make a budget. I appreciated Emily's comments about people wondering where money came from during the actual year. I would appreciate if I could get some more elaboration about that. Not sure of the terminology. I think it was something like intentional decisions. So hopefully some of you can comment about that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Go ahead, Mr. Alexander.
I make these questions because they're just questions and there's something for you to ponder. I'm sure you're not going to answer them right away, but these are just questions for transparency for the benefit of Newington. First question. On the issue of responsibility for the spill, who is ultimately responsible for the spill in the opinion of the superintendent? Number two, on the issue of a strategy of this will never happen ever again, does everyone concerned agree that each action or inaction of employees at the bus garage, actions of the operation officer, actions and decisions of the superintendent, be completely reviewed and investigated by an independent investigation to determine what happened, when it happened, why it happened, how it could have been prevented, and examine all future strategies to ensure a never again strategy. And finally, will the superintendent, the operations officer, and all employees fully cooperate in any such independent investigation? And I give special emphasis to this next statement. Given the magnitude of the spill and what appears to be, and I accent that, what appears to be, because nobody's sure, what appears to be negligence, I ask these questions not to punish or hurt anyone at this table, but for the purpose of learning from what happened to install a never again preventive strategy. That's what I think we all want. I think we do.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Is there any further comment?
What a rush being up here. Actually, it's better to be on this side of the table these days, it sounds like. I don't envy the work that you guys have in front of you.
If you could just say your name and address.
Oh, Jeremy Wetzel, 92 Old Musket Drive. Not a good public speaker, more of a writer, as you all know. But, you know, you're a month in, you're $1 million down in the hole. I think there's going to be some stuff coming. So it's probably a good idea to start planning. I know you have a lot of meetings and stuff, but what Mr. Sylvia is doing is certainly not a bad thing. I certainly wouldn't recommend that he tells Dr. Collins how to do his job, but I think freezes are definitely something that have to be considered. In addition to that, I don't think there should be any increases either. You got to run a minimum operational budget for this. This is a crisis. The tone inside this room and the tone outside of this room are very different. You got to understand that. And I'm not getting the feeling that you do. No, some of you. So that's it. I just think with a stagnant grand list, the state not offering to help or do anything about this other than maybe fine us, and the fact that you know, this thing is, we don't know the magnitude of this thing. They're going to tear down that garage. They're going to tear up the street. Guaranteed it's going to spread out. It's in the brook. It's downstream. This is bigger than what's being talked about. And I'm kind of surprised that there's not an engineer sitting in this chair. I know that Lou has gone through a lot of this, but I would love to see someone that actually has an engineering degree sitting in the room that can tell us what exactly the expansion is going to be of this bill and how far down it'll go. That would be nice. You know, instead of just kind of speculating and how we're going to move money around and rob Peter to pay Paul, it's going to be a big deal. I'm just telling you that right now. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Is there any further comment?
Gary Bowles, 28 Burden Lane. After listening to the audio tape of last night's town council special meeting, I found the conversation between the two gentlemen on the tape to be very upsetting. Statements such as, nobody checked into it for ages, no perpetual inventory kept, alarm hasn't rung in months. This here is actually pure negligence, no matter who neglected to do it. According to the Connecticut General Statute 10-157, the school superintendent, Dr. Collins, is the chief executive officer who is responsible for all day-to-day operations. Of all the policies that are in place, there was no policy for above-ground storage tanks, ? This is basically unacceptable, I think, to all of us. Responsibility and accountability start at the top with Dr. Collins and Mr. Jacomowitz, period. I want to see things change a little bit. I would like to see a policy written for these above-ground storage tanks so that everybody knows what they need to do and when they need to do it. I think this would avoid us having a future situation such as we're faced with right now as to this magnitude. I mean, this is really horrible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening, Beth Del Buno, 327 Walsh Avenue. Full disclosure, town council member also. I just wanted to start out by saying thank you for the open dialogue that I heard this evening. It is nice to hear so many different ideas being batted around and so much consideration being given to the very difficult situation that we are all in, and I'll include myself in that. I want just more for, I know you guys have heard this plenty of times from us at the council, but for the public's understanding, when we hear phrases like that you guys are working so hard to move money around, but that you're getting rid of the flexibility that you have, I want you and everybody to know that we feel your pain, because we've done the same thing on our side. As you all know, we were faced with a $3.4 million decrease in state revenue, and we have made our efforts to attack that on the town side without impacting the operational budget of the Board of Education and without going out and needing to increase taxes. And we've tried to do our best to do that through different avenues, primarily, unfortunately, through CIP, which seems to be where we all go for that funding. And I know how difficult that is to consider putting off projects in order to do that. I appreciate your consideration of that. The one thing I did hear was perhaps not addressing the underground tanks that are currently still out there, and I want to make sure that that I at least say that for me that would be a priority, and I hope that you will consider looking at how to do that. I know you just allocated a lot of money for something, but that I know the chiller is at the top of your list right now, but I would consider those underground tanks too as we move forward and really make that at least up there on the list if possible. I want to thank Mr. Sylvia. I know that sometimes it's exhausting when you're bringing things forward like that. I appreciate the fact that you're acknowledging the immediacy of some of this. And when we do get bills, my understanding is that there could possibly be, and I don't know if that is the case yet, some type of cost savings for paying in an immediate fashion. And you may have discussed this before I got here. Similarly, when I fill my oil tank at home, if I pay within a certain number of days, I get a break. So I think there is an immediacy to that, and I appreciate the thought of looking forward to having some funds available and not having to act here, then come to the council and have that really could potentially take 2 to 4 weeks, depending on when meetings are scheduled. So I appreciate at least the thought process that went into that tonight. I understand all the comments made at the table, and people's reservations around that, but I like that we're thinking perhaps in that direction in moving forward. There were no more handouts in terms of the financial piece when I got here, so I would request, if possible, for you to forward that to the council members so we could just review that. That would be very helpful on our part. And just a thought, I know it's not the board's responsibility in terms of telling the superintendent what to do in terms of hiring. I know on the council side we have put freezes into place, not us, but the town manager has chosen to do that. And she is still hiring when it's an essential or absolute need and is really keeping us apprised of when that happens or when there's a position that she's letting go and not filling. So that might just be something to talk about and consider as a suggestion, even though it may not be your policy to do that. It might be something to consider moving forward. And I heard Ms. Lyons call in and ask about trying not to bond. She is correct. We made that statement last night at our meeting. I think all of us are on board with trying to avoid that if possible. And we did have a nice discussion last night about that. That is our hope. If we can work together as two bodies to try and find ways to fund this project without going out to bonding, that certainly is our intent. That will depend on exactly how many bills we are faced with as time goes on, as you all know. I think that's it. I just wanted to make sure we were all talking about the same thing. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate all the efforts at the table tonight.
Thank you, Mrs. Del Buono. Are there further public comments? And our phone lines are still open at 860-665-8736. Seeing none, and while we wait a few more seconds for the phones, for members of the public and the news that are here, the only other item on our agenda aside from executive session is adjournment, so there will not be any further public portion of our meeting except for the motion to adjourn in public, just to let you all know. I don't see anyone on the lines or anyone coming forward, so we'll move on to executive session. I'd ask that a motion be made to move into executive session to discuss litigation and personnel matters, inviting Mr. Giacomowitz, Dr. Collins, and board counsel to stay in the room with us. And Mrs. Maraca.
Can I just say, so moved?
So moved. Seconded by Mr. Vassell. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of moving into executive session?
Aye.
Aye. At this time, we'll take a 5-minute recess before starting executive session so other folks can stretch their legs. Thank you for everyone who came out this evening, and we're now in executive session, so if we could all clear the room.